I'm Joyce and I'm with OC Habitats. Welcome back to our Typo series. Today I'll be talking about the mid-tide zone. The mid-tide zone is typically submerged underwater for most of the day, except during the lowest low tide. Due to the high submersion rates, the animals in this zone must constantly endure biological stressors, such as predation and interspecific competition, or competition between other animals, for food and space. As a result, there is a higher diversity of organisms, but fewer abundance of these species in the mid-tide zone. Depending on which beach you go to, there can be a vast array of different species from tide pool to tide pool. Today, I'll be highlighting 3 different species that you can find in the mid-tide zone, which are the anemones, the sea stars, and the chitons. Watch out, Marco, you're gonna step on an anemone.
Anemone, but I don't see one.
Well, the anemones you're familiar with are opened up underwater and they can look like underwater flowers, but those are closed up to prevent desiccation or drying up. As you can see, these closed anemones sometimes have pieces of shells on the outside of their soft bodies. These shells are thought to help reflect the sunlight off of their body and allow them to cool down. But it could also help them blend in with their surroundings. They look a lot like a blob with some shells stuck to them.
So you're telling me that anemones open up in cooler areas?
Yeah, this is why you can find them in the cracks and crevices to find cooler areas, but they only open up underwater. But when they're exposed to air, they'll close up.
But if the anemones are in the rocks, how do they eat?
Well, since they do live in the mid-tide zone, there's a constant flow of water coming in and out of the area. So that water brings in their prey, such as crabs, small fish, chitons, and other small marine life.
So they use their stinging cells and their tentacles to eat their prey, right?
You're right. The stinging cells are called nematocysts and can paralyze their prey. Once the prey is paralyzed, they'll bring their prey to their mouth and eat it. However, the downside is the nematocyst doesn't work with any animals that have a hard shell or thick skin, like humans. Once the nematocysts are used, the anemone will have to use energy to regenerate them, which takes approximately 24 hours and is why you shouldn't touch them.
Hold up. Earlier you said that anemones eat crabs, but then you said that nematocysts can't work on any animals with a hard shell. So how does that work out?
You're right. So crabs sometimes don't have shells, which you can learn more about in the high tide video. However, as far as we know, the animals with shells can get stung and captured, but they can eventually escape. Since the anemone is a soft-bodied animal, they can also use their tentacles to fend off predators, such as nudibranchs or large fish. Here's an interesting fact. Anemones are actually territorial animals. If they feel like the anemones near them are taking up too much resources, such as food or space, they will use their tentacles to either fight to the death or until one of them moves far away enough until they are no longer touching one another. In this case, these are solitary anemones or sunburst anemones, creating a mini personal boundary around them.
Oh look, there's a bunch of anemone together. Shouldn't they have like mini boundaries or something?
Yeah, these anemones are called aggregating anemones, which means they're clumped together due to how they reproduce. So the aggregating anemones asexually reproduce. So during high tide, the parent will split its body into 2, and they grow smaller and smaller every time they asexually reproduce. The clones of these same anemones typically don't mind touching one another, but they do have a problem if it's a clone of another anemone. In that case, they will fight until they create a distinct divide between the 2 clone groups.
If aggregating anemone reproduces through fission, then how do solitary anemone reproduce?
So solitary anemones reproduce through a process called broadcast spawning. This also occurs during high tide when the anemones release a chemical cue into the water to notify the surrounding anemones that they're ready to reproduce or mate. So after this happens, the anemone releases their gametes into the waters in hopes that they'll fertilize.
Why do some anemones look more vibrant than others?
Similar to corals, the anemones have a mutualistic symbiotic relationship with green algae. The algae is the bright green color that you see in the anemone, and they provide the anemone with oxygen and nutrients through photosynthesis. On the other hand, the anemone provides the algae with protection from predators and nutrients from their discharge. In terms of how vibrant the anemones look, the anemones that get more sunlight are more vibrant because they attain the necessary amount of sunlight for the algae to use for their photosynthesis, while the anemones that are more shaded have less algae, making them more yellowish and gray. Anemones are fascinating creatures. Can you remember what the purpose of their nematocytes or stinging cells are? Is it to protect themselves from predators, to paralyze their prey, fight off other anemones, or all of the above? If you answered all of the above, you're doing amazing. So the nematocytes have several different functions. First, to fend off their predators. They'll harm them by stinging them and deter the predators from coming. Second, to paralyze their prey, to prevent the prey from swimming away or crawling away. And third, to fight off other anemones to increase their food resources.
So why didn't we see any starfish today?
Well, first off, they're not called starfish, they're actually called sea stars since they aren't fishes. And the most common one are the ochre sea stars and their keystone species. So keystone species have a disproportionately large effect on the ecosystem, and they help maintain a high biodiversity in the ecosystem. So to put it simply, if there's a couple of them, they just have a big effect on the area. There also aren't many sea stars in the area due to the sea star wasting syndrome that began in July 2013 all along the west coast of North America.
So how can sea stars make an impact on the ecosystem if there's only a few of them?
That's a great question. So the sea star's impact is actually due to their diet. They mainly prey on barnacles and mussels, but can also eat other animals such as snails and chitons. Since the sea stars eat animals with shells on them, they use their two feet to pry apart the shell, then invert their stomachs into the open shell to digest their prey. By eating a large number of mussels, the sea stars keep the mussel population in check by preventing the mussels from crowding out space for other species to live in. As a result, the empty space will be filled with algae to grow on and allow other animals to thrive, ensuring a greater biodiversity. Speaking of arms, the sea stars can have anywhere between 4 to 7 of them, but they can be generally seen with 5 arms, and each arm contains a podia, pedicellaria, and an eye spot. The podia, or 2 feet, are the countless number of little frills that you can find arranged on the underside of the arm. The podia are used to pass food to the mouth, help the sea stars move by hydraulic pressure, and hold onto surfaces to avoid being washed away. The pedicellariae, or pinchers, are mixed in with the podia on the bottom of their arms. These pinchers are typically used to remove debris from the body of the sea stars. The eye spot is a simple eye located on the tips of each arm and used to distinguish light from dark. These eyes help the sea stars detect their prey and any oncoming predators, such as large fish, gulls, and sea turtles.
Besides clinging onto their surroundings, are there any other ways for sea stars to protect themselves from predators?
Yeah, so their other defense mechanism is through their skin. The sea stars have a hard outer skin with many ossicles, which are spines and bumps located on top of the sea star. These ossicles are white calcareous plates that help stiffen their body, giving the sea star their whitish webbing on the outside of their body.
So I heard if a sea star's arm falls off, it could regenerate into a different sea star. Is that true?
Technically, yes and no. So if the sea star's arm gets cut off through predation or environmental factors, then it won't regenerate. However, if part of the central disc is detached, which is like their body and an arm, that piece will regenerate into a new independent sea star. Also, this is another form of asexual reproduction for these sea stars, and it's called fragmentation or fission.
So then how do sea stars sexually reproduce?
So similar to the anemones, the sea stars sexually reproduce through a process called broadcast spawning. So during the spring and summer, the sea stars will send out their chemical cues to let the surrounding sea stars know that they're ready to reproduce. Then they'll release their gametes into the water in hopes that they'll fertilize. Wow, who knew that the sea stars can do so much with their arms? Can you remember what's located at the end of each arm? Is it the ossicles, the eye spot, or the peduncle? If you answered eye spot, you're spot on. So the eye spot, also known as the simple eye, helps the sea star differentiate light and dark. If the sea star's vision becomes dark, they'll know that something is very close. So in the terms of predation, if there's something nearby, the sea star can crawl closer to it to eat it. But in terms of predation, the sea stars can prepare to protect themselves by clinging onto their substrate. You should keep your eyes open for our next animal because compared to the sea stars and anemones, the chitons are quite small and they can blend in.
I'm not quite sure what they look like. Can you describe them to me?
Sure. In general, the chians have a hard outer shell that is made up of 8 bony plates that kind of resembles an armor. These shells overlap with one another and allow the chian flexibility in their movement. If they would like, they could curl up into a ball like a roly-poly to defend themselves. Depending on the species of chitin, these animals may or may not have a girdle surrounding their body for protection or camouflage.
I think I found one, but the chitin looks like it's indented into the rock.
Yeah, well, there's a reason that they're indented into the rocks. Much like the limpets, the chitins uses their radula, or razor-sharp teeth, to scrape at the rock to create a home scar that will perfectly fit their body. By doing so, the chitin can create a suction when they settle down to prevent desiccation or drying out.
If the chitin is suctioned into the home scar, when do they come out for feeding?
The chitins are nocturnal feeders, so during the night they'll pop out of their home scar and meander around to find algae to feed on. But in the meanwhile, they'll graze away at anything in their territory in an effort to defend it. Interestingly enough, if the chitin does travel far away in search of food, scientists have made speculations as to how the chitins can find their way back. First, like a snail, the chitins leave a mucus trail wherever they go, so they can follow the mucus trail back. Second, the chitins can travel back by following chemical cues. Third, since the chitins have excellent vision, they can use that to look at their surrounding location to travel back to their home scar. And last but not least, chitins are believed to be able to sense the Earth's polarity and can use that to find their way back.
I was wondering, are the chitin shells primarily used for protection against predators?
It is one of the functions, but there are other functions to the chitin's aragonite shell. As you mentioned, the shell can be used to protect the chitin from their predators, which are the seagulls, sea stars, and lobsters. The shell can also prevent desiccation or drying out when the chitins use their shell to clamp down onto their home scar to maintain the moisture. Finally, if the chitin lives higher up on the tides, they can use their shell to protect them from any oncoming wave action. Now that you've learned more about the chitins, can you recall what is one method that they might use to return back to their home scar? Is it through hydrodynamic reception, by making a mental map of the area, or by using their slime trail? If you answered using their slime trail, you're on the right track. Much like the snails, the chitins will release a trail of mucus and use that to find their way back to their home scar. Now that you've learned more about the different species in the mid-tide zone and their issues and adaptation, you can be more aware about how they interact with the environment. To learn more about the different species in each zonation, you can check out our channel for previous and upcoming videos. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for future OCH videos.